So just want to note everyone that this session will be recorded. So, John, you want to introduce yourself real quick?
Sure. Thanks, Brian. I'm John Colclaser with the Congressional Sportsmen's Foundation. Our organization just represents hunters and anglers collectively across North Carolina, and I'm originally from North Carolina, and I still hunt game lands from the mountains to the coast.
All right. Kate Heim for the Jordan Lake Trails Conservation Association. We are part of the the trail that we're building comes from the North Carolina Horse Council, which Sue Gray is also on the call, and we'll talk later. But we're building a horse trail out with the Wildlife Resources Commission out at Mason Point on Jordan Lake. And so we have, as that's game lands, we have a specific interest in that.
I don't see Amber, so.
Oren Miller with the National Deer Alliance. We're a national organization that advocates on behalf of wild deer species across the country.
Good morning, Trevor Santos with the National Shooting Sports Foundation. We're the trade association for the firearms, ammunition, hunting, and recreational shooting sports industries.
Hey, morning, everyone. Chris Coxon with the National Wild Turkey Federation. I'm the biologist for NWTF in North Carolina and head up our conservation programs. So we're a grassroots organization that supports, R3 activities in the state of North Carolina, as well as supporting game lands management and, kind of across the board involved with a lot of WRC things.
Hey, Lena.
I'm Lena Galatano. I am a longtime volunteer with the North Carolina Birding Trail from the time it was first an idea. For 12 years, I worked on it. We have a number of sites that are on game lands and national forest, and so I'm representing the integrity of the North Carolina Birding Trail.
Thanks, Lena. Bob?
I'm Bob Pendergrass. I'm with the North Carolina Falconers Guild, representing the sportsmen that practice the sport of falconry here in North Carolina.
Sue?
Sue Gray. I'm the executive director of the North Carolina Horse Council. We're the agricultural commodity group representing all horse people across our state on policies, laws, rules, and regulations that impact our organization.
Great. Barb?
I'm Barbara Driscoll. I'm president of New Hope Audubon Society, which is the local Audubon society that covers Durham, Orange, and Chatham counties.
Great. Thanks, Barb. Robert, you there?
Yes, this is Robert Skull. I'm with the North Carolina Sierra Club. We've been around since 1892, and our purpose is to explore, enjoy, and protect the environment. I like to kayak on rivers, and we also like to go hiking.
Thanks. Jacob, you there? You're muted, by the way. There you go.
My name is Jacob Hupp, calling in from the Sportsmen's Alliance. This is Sunday hunting's something we push, nationwide in all 50 states, and it's been we have a long history of engaging on Sunday hunting issues. Just happy to be part of the discussion. Thanks, guys.
You got it. And I didn't see Brian on the call. Brian, are you out there? Right there? Nope, didn't see him. Cyrus, welcome.
Yep, sorry, I don't know, it was a mix-up there. I don't know that I sent in the correct information or anything, but Cyrus Baird with Safari Club International. We're a nonprofit group advocating for hunters' rights and conservation across the country and worldwide. And I'm just north of you guys in Virginia, but spend a considerable amount of time in Edenton during the summer and winter. So my passion is definitely North Carolina as well.
Thank you. That's everyone that we've got so far. We'll keep an eye out for Brian when he gets here. So back to you, Mr. McCray.
Great. Sounds good. And thank you everyone for the introductions there. Just want to touch base on the purpose of the session a little bit. We're going to review some of the Sunday hunting on game lands options that were generated during the online survey and our public meetings that were held earlier this year. We hope to refine and expand on some of the options, alternatives, and criteria that came out of those data gathering sessions. Hopefully you can help us develop some pros and cons for each alternative or criteria. And in terms of developing criteria, we're looking for ideas for specific types of game land. So do we have different criteria for an urban game land or a rural game land or a rural game land that supports many different activities? So just some things to be thinking about today that we hope to develop some criteria on in terms of making this decision or presenting this concept to our commission. We also want to touch base a little bit on the willingness to pay concept that came out of some of the public meetings, just touch on that a little bit. And depending on how the discussion goes and the time that we have remaining, we'll touch base on individual game lands as we can. But just thinking a little bit more about the big ideas that came out of the survey and the public meetings that we're trying to pull at today. Now, we had over 30,000 responses to the online survey as well as the listening sessions that we conducted. We definitely heard the all or none ideas, all or none options, or the 100% positions. We're hoping not to focus so much on those today. We're really looking for some way to find a solution or an idea or a compromise that we can advance, that we can push forward. You know, pushing forward or advancing a solution, that's different than everyone on the call fully supporting a solution, or you fully supporting an idea, but is an idea that you can live with, is an option you can live with and essentially get behind. You know, I fully know we're going to disappoint you today. I just hope that we're going to disappoint you at a level that you can accept. So essentially, is a compromise possible? And what are the possible elements of a fair solution? Those are those kind of points that we're trying to pull on today. So essentially, for your charge, for you today, as we talk through all this, and as I'm sure you've given this lots of thought already, we're asking you to assess the game lands or the types of game lands that you're familiar with and create options for those. Now, we're looking for the non-win-lose options or alternatives for implementing Sunday hunting on game lands. Now, ideally, where possible, it'd be to provide recommendations that reflect consensus in this group or at least strong agreement. That's kind of what we're looking for today. And in the end, I mentioned criteria a number of times already, but to generate criteria for us to utilize and consider as we're putting together potential proposals for these game lands that we will eventually bring forward to our commission. That's kind of the charge for the day. Just a little bit of background, a little bit of a refresher in terms of Sunday hunting on game lands and how we got here. The Outdoor Heritage Act of 2015, that removed the prohibition on hunting with firearms on Sundays, and that was in effect since 1868. In 2017, the Outdoor Heritage Enhanced Act was passed, and that granted authority to the commission to implement rules that allowed hunting on Sundays on game lands. So we've been working on that ever since, and still have some work to do. But the Outdoor Heritage Enhanced Act did have some other prohibitions in it. Vern, if you can go on the next slide, thank you. It still does prohibit hunting with a firearm between 9:30 a.m. and 12:30 p.m. It does prohibit hunting deer use of dogs, and it prohibits hunting within 500 yards of a place of worship. Just for clarification, we mentioned this during our listening sessions as well, but while the Act does have verbiage regarding migratory bird hunting on Sundays, that's a whole different ball of wax, a whole different can of worms that is its own focus group. We've delved in that once already, and we would need to again before we were to advance that idea any further. So just putting that on the table, that's really not the focus today. We're really not going to get into that at all today and with this group. Just wanted to clear up that a little bit. as for our timeline, we've held our 6 public meetings, 2 of them virtually. Those, I think, went really well. Got really good information out of those. Our next step was to hold these focus group meetings, and as I mentioned before, we hope for them to be in person, but we've adapted, and we're giving this virtual focus meeting a go. And again, yesterday went well. I expect today to go well also. After these focus groups, we'll then have a WRC retreat. So this retreat is going to consist of a number of staff members throughout the agency, different backgrounds, different interests, and our charge is to take the information, the options, the criteria really generated from this focus group, these focus groups, and refine them into actual proposals. Once those proposals are kind of generated, those ideas are generated, we'll then go to specific landowners like the U.S. Forest Service, the Army Corps of Engineers, UMG, and discuss with them these specific proposals that affect the land that they have enrolled in the Game Lands program. And that will determine what happens on those properties. Once we've got a better feel and a firm handle on the proposals or the options we plan to propose to our commission, we'll then reconvene this focus group, or more likely one big Zoom meeting with everyone from all 3 focus groups, and provide an update, just a heads up as to where we are in terms of the proposals and where we hope to go next with the commission. That will be our next step, to provide a final report to our commission, and we're hoping to have that to them in the August-September timeline of this year, because our rules are on a pretty set schedule. As a lot of you are aware, in October is when our commission really votes to advance them, to push them forward. And if we get approval in October, all rules, including anything related to Sunday hunting on game lands, will then go to our January public hearings. And many of you are aware of them, many of you have been to them in the past, but any proposal, any potential rule will then go forward, if it's approved by the commission in October, to our January public hearings, at which time public comment is available both at those public meetings and online. And then once we pass that process, that's when our commission eventually votes on those proposals. And if they pass, these rules become effective in August of 2021. So once they do become effective, as we do with all of our rules, then we're continuing to evaluate our rules, see if they're effective, see if they're meeting the needs as were intended, whether it's a biological change or human behavior change that's anticipated, and we'll see what effect we're having. That takes time. We typically say anywhere from 3 to 5 years is when it takes to really evaluate a change in a biological population. And we'll look at that same timeline here. Granted, if things are changing rapidly and things aren't working and drastic changes to be made, we'll look at rules to tweak the rules and make those changes and make these proposals as best as they can be. So really, that's the timeline we're looking at, and really all I think I have to say on that one. Group Solutions. So kind of transition over to Brett here. So the Group Solutions, they're the third-party facilitator we've had on board now for this project for a while. They've been the ones helping to lead and document the discussions, both at our listening sessions and during these focus groups. They're helping us collect information and come up with real options, again, to provide to our commission. And again, they're looking for agreement and consensus, or at least long agreement when possible. So with that, Brett, I'll go ahead and over to you.
All right. Hey, thanks everybody, and glad you're here. We had a fabulous session yesterday. I'm looking forward to another great session today. We've got a good mix of folks here and a real powerful audience, which is super. Our job is to get everything and put a report together. So whether it happens in the listening sessions, or whether it happens here at the focus groups, or whether you want to send us stuff after this meeting, whatever, to get in the minutes, really happy to do that. Our job is to put together a report that reflects the input we got from everybody. So glad to be here and you guys make sure we come up with whatever we can agreement-wise. As I said, we had a great session yesterday, and really it was just I thought we covered a lot of bases, and I think we should today. It was we should get as much option, as many ideas, as many criteria, and as many good thoughts as you have about any of the issues before us. We'll present some ideas here in a second. Our time's limited, so let's try to get closure on ideas before we move to the next. The chat tool is really a great place to get your ideas in. So if you can, if you're thinking, or people are talking around this idea, but you want to get it in, if you put it in there, it's part of the minutes as well. So if you got a big idea and we're on another topic, but you want to make sure we grab it, you can stick it in there or just hang on to it. And we'll try to make sure we watch and see what everybody's doing as we go through to get there. I'll say we're going to move fast, looking for consensus or strong agreement. No no's will do if we've got to take that. And we're really looking for the idea that, look, if we can get some agreement here, or lack of disagreement in some respects, then I think what we have is, our contention at least is, we'll have a greater impact on our ability to influence the outcomes with the commission. And I think that's kind of what we're looking at. So far, I think it looks to me as an outsider that agreement is very possible. So let's rock and roll. All right, so we're going to use this morning. We got an hour and 40 left to us. We will pause, give everybody a mental health break. You can really overload on Zoom. We'll wrap up right around 11. If you need to go before or after, fine. We will reconvene at 1 and pick up from where we left off. We'll do a quick summary and go through that, and then we'll do a final wrap up. So we've got time in there. The session will remain up, so you can log out, log back in, or you can leave it running. Totally up to you. And so that'll be live and going. Yesterday we just left it up, and some folks stayed on, some folks came and went, but everything's the same. We'll leave it live. That's the big ideas here. There you go. So look, it's about courtesy and just getting there. I don't think it's going to be an issue for us overall. We get there. And if there's a game land that we want to talk about or break out, or say, what about, whether it's Jordan Lake or whatever, great. We can focus discussion on specific areas that might be more problematic than others. But we're looking for a wide range. Everything's on the table in terms of addressing things. And so our job is to get the larger discussions on the table for everyone. Simplicity seems to be the message that we're getting. We got it from the other focus group. We got it from the listening sessions. If we can keep things pretty simple, not too complicated. Hunting regs are complicated enough as it is. And so we've gotten that message loud and clear, and we'll be looking for those kind of approaches there. Go ahead, Vern. And so let's start out with, this is kind of where we ended up with, just in a broad sense. This is kind of the basic alternatives, ideas, range of things there. There were some subtext under some of these, but these were the broad range of things that we started with. We put that out there as an opening discussion to talk about Sunday, not to say, oh, we got to look only at these. So I'm putting on the table and want to open the floor for ideas around how we can move forward in North Carolina. How do you see us moving forward most effectively in North Carolina as we address this issue? So the floor is open for conversation. Who's first?
Hey, this is Trevor Santos from the National Shooting Sports Foundation. I see some of the options here for certain game species. I think going down that route is going to maybe create some confusion. Actually, it's going to create a lot of confusion. So it would be my opinion and the opinion of the National Shooting Sports Foundation that if a game land is going to be open, that it be open for the hunting of all legal species during that season. And again, if it's open, if it's open, it's open. If it's closed, it's closed. But allowing certain species is just going to create, I think, too much confusion on the part of hunters.
Yeah, Trevor, we heard that in the listening sessions quite a bit, that it just was, well, why? And then it's sort of a tease, but thank you. Appreciate that. Others?
This is Lena. I just would like to give an overall thought for some of the considerations when we're moving down this path. I agree with the idea that we shouldn't have specific game lands. So I don't know, can you all not see my photograph?
We see you. You look great.
Oh, I can't see. Okay, I'm good.
You
So
got-
anyway, I hate talking to a blank screen. So as I said, I worked for many years as a volunteer with the Wildlife Resources Commission and 5 other agencies on the North Carolina Birding Trail. There are over 300 sites on the North Carolina Birding Trail. But when it comes to game lands and national forest, there are 16 sites on game lands in North Carolina, and I may have missed some. I did not get this official number from the Birding Trail at the commission. I just did a quick scan of the field guide, of the trail guides. I also looked at national forests. There are 20 sites in national forests that are on the Birding Trail. This is definitely an economic driver for North Carolina because we have a lot of people that bird in North Carolina that come to visit. And these sites, as a part of those 3 field guides across the state, in the front of the book, it says, we suggest that you go birding on Sunday because at this time, there are no sites on the north, there is no hunting in North Carolina. And then it refers you to the commission's website. On each site on the trail, it says there is hunting, refers you back to the front where it says there is no Sunday hunting. So in any discussion, I would like to see the North Carolina Birding Trail sites removed as alternatives for a place to open Sunday hunting. And there are certainly some of these large forests in the West. They're not all sites on the Birding Trail, but there are some very popular ones there, as well as in the Croatan Forest down east. So if you would just keep that in the back of your mind, I'd appreciate it. There are thousands of people that bird across North Carolina. Thanks.
Got it. Thank you. So you're saying remove all sites on state game lands that have these, that are listed as birding sites, and you're saying national forests as well? Just being clear.
I'm not saying list all of them because, for example, let me see if I can find the title of one here. Holly Shelter Game Land Green Tree Impoundment. So that only impacts one small part. Then the other site on the trail is the Holly Shelter Game Land Southeast Gate. So I don't know how you can work that out, but I think that we're telling people to go there to bird. And if we're going to have an issue with who uses it on Sunday, maybe we can find another part of those game lands that would be suitable for Sunday hunting, but keep the intact birding trail site.
Okay. And question from Cyrus is a good one. When we find that list of lands, did you say that they were on the commission site?
No, they're on the North Carolina Birding Trail site, which is operated out of the non-game group at the commission.
Gotcha. Okay. But it's on your site that would have that map. So Cyrus, I think it's the North Carolina Birding Trail site is what Lena's saying. Thanks. Thank you, Lena. That was just a question Cyrus had in the chat. Okay, others.
So this is Barbara Driscoll of New Hope Audubon. I would say that some of our concerns and issues would be alleviated if there was no hunting before 1 p.m. And also if there was no hunting during our Christmas bird count, because we do a number of counts only on Sunday for that reason. That would be December 14th through January 5th.
Okay.
Best time to hunt.
I was going to say, kind of unfortunate. So you're saying no hunting anywhere, or no Sunday hunting anywhere? I mean, our discussion's about Sunday hunting.
Just Sunday hunting. That's when we do our bird counts, is on Sundays.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
Hey, this is John. I mean, if we're just talking kind of big picture here, hunting doesn't only takes place really a small portion of the year. So, I hope that y'all will kind of keep that in mind just as a general access to public lands. I mean, hunters are, not out there most of the year. So I don't think we're really, asking for a whole lot to have that Sunday day. And, some of these birding sites y'all are using on game lands you're there because there's habitat diversity that's funded through hunter license dollars that's created that habitat that the commission's put it on the ground. So I think there's a relationship there that if you kind of realize what hunters are contributing and then you're saying we can't use that land, that just seems a little bit, hypocritical, to be honest, in my eyes. And we hope that we could, work together because, there's some bigger conservation issues facing the state where we could, instead of getting on these Zoom meetings and parsing out different game lands, maybe we could all come together and, find some things to work toward. And, I might suggest on Sundays, looking at a state park or a city park or a national forest. There's a lot of other public lands in the state where people can not have that experience if they're concerned about Sunday hunting, which is really only in the fall, in the middle of the winter, and in spring. So the rest of the year it's open. So, that's kind of my 2 cents on the matter.
Thanks, John. Okay, good. Others, just open for discussion, just getting everybody a chance to kind of lay the table out. So dialogue going.
If I could just address kind of the issue from the specific Jordan Lake Trails horseback riding trail perspective, because I'm not sure where the other horseback riding trails are on game lands, and I understand there's some different rules in different places, but as it stands right now, when our trail does open, it will only open on Sundays during hunting season, and we are not allowed to ride on other days. So that will be something that will have to be figured out if this becomes part of the solution. When do they get to ride during hunting season? The other concern is that in terms of when we look at what hunting season is and what our memorandum of understanding is for the Mason Point Trail, we're really it's Sundays only, except for the end of turkey season to September 1st. So it's the hottest time of the year, and it's not that many months overall. So if there's a different understanding or something, I just would consider that it is limited in terms of the horses. I'm not saying a compromise can't be reached. I'm just saying in terms of our perspective, it is a lot of the year that Sunday hunting is there. But that doesn't mean an agreement can't be reached. So.
Yeah, Kate, you bring up a great point. We talked a lot about that Sunday issue as it applies to the horseback riders, and it's a big issue because a lot of that has been you can only use Sunday on these days on these game lands, and so there are a tremendous number of restrictions that the horseback riding community has already under in terms of when they in fact can use it. So, John, to some extent, that your point that the horseback riders really are that they're kind of in a pretty much a box area too, and there's a really complex relations to that by game land, really. So we get that, Kate. Heard a lot about that.
Well, sure, but the game lands, their purpose, respectfully, isn't specifically for horseback riders, and people in other states have made the cases that use by all sorts of different people could be in conflict with the Pittman-Robertson regs as a diversion of funds, which could put the state at risk. So we haven't gone down that path, but that's kind of one of the larger conversations out there, that really these lands are managed for wildlife associated recreation. And so does that apply to people on four-wheelers? Does that apply to people on horseback? There's that larger conversation. I think that's
absolutely. Yeah. Well, so from a dollar amount, a little feedback there. Good. From a dollar amount, I think the numbers that we had in the meeting was that about 89% was funded by these are funded by purchase by, about 11% people and other licenses. So in terms of the purchase of the land, citizens of North Carolina in general bought the lands. So that piece is there. John, you're right on. 75% coming out of PR. matches, licenses, hunt, fish, boat, a few other things. So you are correct in terms of the maintenance portion of it. Okay.
Well, I mean, if those funds come from Clean Water Management Trust Fund, hunters are state citizens as well and pay into those accounts too. So I don't think that's exclusionary by any means.
Oh, no. About 4%. We got that. So, okay.
I've got a question that may be geared more towards Brian. And the question is, how many reported incidents are there annually or over the span of 5 or 10 years that happen between hunters and non-hunters? And are we seeing them taking place? If not, wouldn't that be the reason to open Sunday? Because we can both use the lands without it.
So first off, Brett, can you hear me okay? I'm getting a lot of feedback. I'm not sure if it's.
It was Trevor. I think he had an open mic and it was kind of reverbing. We got it. Go ahead.
Okay, so you can hear me okay?
It's better now. Yeah, thanks.
So yes, I haven't opened up and looked specifically at our data regarding this issue. I'm only aware of 1 or 2 instances on game lands in the past 5+ years. I would have to ask our enforcement division to provide that information to me, but that's what I have off the top of my head.
Yeah, Trevor, what were you getting at there? The in terms of just the conflicts on the trails and that kind of thing. I mean, I was just I wanted to capture that properly.
I'm sorry, did you want me to repeat the question, Brett?
When you talk about incidents, I mean, can you expand a little bit? Are you talking about safety incidents or conflicts or law enforcement had to be called in?
Yeah, more so safety incidents between a hunter and a non-hunting user of the land. So again, is safety an issue with hunters and non-hunters both using the game lands? And if they're not, what would be the harm in opening up Sunday hunting if we can use the game lands without incident Monday through Saturday? What's the harm in opening Sunday if safety is going to be?
Gotcha.
So, yeah, Brett, just really quick. So, sorry, when I first heard the question, I was thinking specifically about reported instances of a user being shot. So that's what I was responding to. Other conflicts, whether safety or not, they do pop up. I think everyone on the call is likely aware of that, whether it's disruption of a hunt or just encounters on a trail, adjoining landowner issues. These conflicts are there. We manage them, we work through them, and that's what we would have to continue to do on Sunday.
Yeah, I mean, I can say that yes, there are conflicts, but they do happen, and all the groups can talk about those. Hunters can talk about conflicts they've had with other hunters, so it's not that piece. But if it was a safety issue, it was really interesting. Yesterday we did have the AT folks were on, and they were able to give us a piece of data from the trail itself and any incidents there over time. And Trevor, to your point, it was on the AT Appalachian Trail. There was no fatalities. I think there were 2 hikers shot over the course of 25 years. So it's been a pretty low incidence rate there on that in terms of that safety issue. Good. Others, thanks.
Yeah, I've got a quick question. It may just be for background for my information, and it may be for Brian or Carrie or somebody. But I work on so many different states with so many different state agencies across the country, and so stuff kind of jumbles together. In North Carolina, for the average citizen, whether they're a resident or non-resident, what do they need to specifically have from WRC to access a game land right now, whether it's a license or a license and a permit or just a permit? Or if I just wanted to go walk around a game land, or if I wanted to go squirrel hunt, what is the, not bare minimum because that sounds bad, but what is the required license that an average citizen needs?
Sure. So it varies, but a couple of your examples there. If you want to go hike on a game land, currently you don't need anything. If you want to go horseback ride on a couple of game lands where we have some infrastructure in place, like a parking lot, you need to buy a $15 game land license. That game land license is now included in your hunting, fishing, and trapping license. Historically, previous years, you'd have to purchase a hunting license and a game land license for a certain select few of our hunting licenses. That's all wrapped into the one package now. So in terms of your question, I think it varies. For hiking, you don't need anything right now. The horseback ride on certain areas, you need a game land license. And, of course, to hunt and fish and trap, all that's currently included.
Is birding considered under the hiking category, or is that a separate?
No, yeah, you go birding without any license or pass.
Okay.
Yeah, that includes, if you want to go climbing,
Sure,
biking, any of that stuff is free.
good to know. Thank you.
And Robert, you've had your hand up for a while, and then I'll come to Chris.
Yes, one of the things that I'm involved in is the Adopt a Shoreline program with Jordan Lake. And Jordan Lake, part of it is pretty close to some residential areas, and this is true of some other game lands as well. And there was a shooting incident on Eagle Spur a couple of years ago, in which a jogger was fired at when she was very close to a residential neighborhood. You can actually access the trail from the neighborhood. Obviously, these things rarely happen, but it does frighten people. And when I get people out to do a cleanup on the Jordan Lake, and the volunteers here shooting, they're very reluctant to go into the woods. And so, there's some people who would clean up, but they're not going to do it if they think they're shooting in the woods. Now, I would say this is an overreaction, perhaps, but this is the way people respond.
Good, thanks. Appreciate
So,
it.
Robert, one question for you: Would they feel any more comfortable if they were wearing blaze orange during that cleanup exercise?
Well, I haven't required them to wear the blaze orange. I don't know if they would or not. That's a decent question.
Yeah, we had a lot of trail folks on yesterday that built trail for access, whether it was the climbers or even the paddling community. And they do wear orange when they're in the woods, like doing their trailblazing or any trail repair, particularly during hunting season. But they specifically said they used Sunday as the day that they were using so as not to disturb the hunt, as opposed to, the safety issue. But I do get that piece. Chris Coxon, you there?
Yeah, sorry. I appreciate this conversation, and I think I'll just sort of try to find a silver linings here, whereas I think this conversation is an opportunity for a lot of groups to better understand, how folks use game lands, and also, have a dialogue about better understanding, how hunters use land, how hunters are funding conservation on a lot of the lands that we're discussing today, but also, the importance of how other folks use these game lands. And I think it's an opportunity to have this discussion about safety, how folks are using those lands, wearing blaze orange on certain days, and just sort of better understand these multiple uses. And I think we can address a lot of these concerns if these discussions are had, and the right signage is in place. And I see it as a kind of a chance that we can come together, more as folks that care about these places and want to use these special places and appreciate wildlife on the game land. So I'd like to sort of frame this conversation more in the opportunity and that silver lining, I think. And perhaps that's a more sort of fertile space to have this dialogue. So yeah, I think in many ways we want to see these game lands well managed, wildlife diversity maintained, and opportunities available for all of our specific interests to be held. And I think, it seems like low hanging fruit for us to kind of have this conversation. So yeah, I appreciate the dialogue, but just wanted to sort of throw that out.
Good. Kate, you were up, and then Sue.
Actually, I'll let Sue go first, and then I'll follow up with anything. Since she hasn't spoken up, I'll let her go first.
Thank you.
Thanks, everyone. Really enjoy listening to this. I wanted to come back, though, and address a few issues that were raised. From the equine standpoint, from horseback riding, we are probably more restricted than other user groups. And Brian, we're very you've done to help us as well, Chris as well. But in looking at the alternatives, I think someone spoke earlier and said that there's a limited amount of hunting. For us, there's really only the time between May and September and Sunday on most of these lands. And so for alternatives to look at or to work in multi-user groups, using our game lands, we're looking at opening up then more days or more opportunities. One of the things the Horse Council has always looked at, and we've talked to other states as well, are management techniques and getting outside of the box of management of days and looking at management of hours, and perhaps looking at the ideal times when hunters go in early morning, coming back during twilight, right before sunset, and looking at those hunting times and allowing other user groups in the middle parts of more days, offering more opportunities. It's something that New Mexico has tried. I haven't been able to follow up this week on that, but it's an issue that other states have looked at kind of as alternatives to this. Sunday has been the day as far as trail maintenance and the ability to maintain the trails and even access that has been available to the equestrian community. Not that we're not opposed to looking at any of the alternatives that are discussed, but we need to be aware that in those, I think a comment was made about the Pittman Robinson and looking at some of that. These lands are purchased by other dollars, as I think, Brett, you said. We're all citizens and we all want to be able to get the most use as we can. The mission of statement includes that statement that, this is open to the citizens of North Carolina and the use of public lands. One of the things here was to promote state and local parks that might better meet the needs of non-hunters. I couldn't agree more with that. We're absolutely trying to do that, but what we're finding is that more and more of these public lands are being taken back and away from equestrian use as opposed to equestrians being added to that use. We're often not at the table on some of those. So any support from the wildlife to help work on that would be greatly appreciated, and I think is an alternative to be considered.
So you're looking at, just to frame it, Sue, it's really that looking at hours, which I like, the idea that maybe it's an hour issue of when we might be able to ride. Okay, I got that. And you said New Mexico was looking at that.
Mexico has a program similar to that.
Okay, thanks.
Actually, Sue, just for my understanding, can you elaborate on that a little bit more? So the hunters say typically go in early morning. So would this alternative idea be that no other user would be allowed during that window, and then same time twilight, no other user allowed during that time? I just wanted to get a better feel for what that alternative or that idea was.
Well, I think there are a lot of different options within that, but the one that I'm the most familiar is that they tried to single use it by saying, yes, only hunters are in during those early hours and the evening hours, and the other user groups are in at the other times. But,
and then the hunters would need to go out by 11 o'clock or to some time frame. I'm just trying to get.
Either they would go out or they would not be They would not be shooting during that time. They wouldn't necessarily have to go out. They just wouldn't be actively shooting during those times.
Thanks.
I mean, if you're calling up a turkey, you certainly don't want to, some people, you want to stay there and kind of keep working that turkey's coming back that evening if you haven't gotten them yet. So, I mean, we're not necessarily saying you have to vacate your stand or vacate your area. Another interesting science fact that we'd like people to understand is the horse is not a predatory animal. It's not going to scare away the game. Somebody walking through might, but a horse going through there is not going to necessarily scare the game.
So in the current law, Sue, as you see it, even if we added Sunday hunting at locations, we do have that morning block on Sunday where
Right.
there is that non-hunting window. So to some extent, the some of that hourly piece is accommodated for the Sunday block, but it's not for other days of the week. Okay, just
Correct. Or you might extend that Sunday a little bit longer from the 12:30, extending it just a little bit longer, and then letting the hunters come in later. And that way, you'd still preserve a big block of the Sunday non-user group.
Got it, Kate.
Yeah, just a couple things I wanted to clarify. As Sue was saying, horses are not predatory animals, but they are prey animals. So when we talk about safety, it is a concern for people will not ride, or, if there's shooting going on. A lot of horses are spooked by shooting. So I know that's not the primary use of the game lands, and people have to work around that. But there can be other incidents, not lethal likely, but to consider. The other thing is that, if I recall correctly, there was a large support for people to pay these other fees, to pay to use these lands by a number of users. And I don't know, that's another topic, but in terms of the other users, I thought we were, by all means, if we're going to use it, let's help pay for it. So.
Yeah, we'll get to that.
I would add to that, the Horse Council strongly supports user fees, bridle fees, and are having the license. That's absolutely what should occur.
Okay, thank you both. Okay, so we've had that piece. I want to make sure everybody gets a chance to kind of get that opening salvo out there. We've talked about a lot of things, so but I want to make sure everybody's got a chance to put in there. Bob, go ahead.
Okay, I think I'm unmuted. I'm sorry I had to leave for a few minutes earlier. I might have been given an opportunity earlier and passed on it, but I just want to kind of represent where the North Carolina Falconers Guild comes from on this issue. We've been very fortunate, and I'd say somewhat privileged, in the fact that we've been allowed Sunday hunting for some years now with our birds on game lands. So I don't want to be hypocritical and say we'd like to keep that just for us, because that's not the right approach. I do think that the window of closure to game hunting facilitates us, because our biggest concern is, even if we're wearing safety orange, is the safety of our birds. But the things that was being said just a few minutes ago by the horse folks, extension of the hours would be even better. But that's where we're coming from. And in reality, I think that allowing other people to be involved on game lands is important, but also allowing other people to pay for involvement on game lands is important too. Because the more that we can do to promote game lands in North Carolina, I think we're better.
Good. So you're Raleigh, game land support as well. Okay, and extension. To hear Bob as well.
I'm sorry, you went in and out a little bit there, but yeah, extension of the morning window would be great for us. And again, we realize that the Sunday hunting issue will promote game lands in a lot of ways by allowing more hunters to participate. Some people don't have an opportunity to hunt except on Sunday, and we'd like to see more young people get involved in hunting, whether it be through falconry or other means.
Thanks, Bob.
Thank you.
And I know Bob, Bob is having a bit of a background piece there, but essentially extension of the hours, kind of following up on what you were saying, Sue, and the issue of his big concern really was about safety of their birds. And he was looking at kind of the same conversation that I think Chris really launched, which is, hey, there's a bigger picture here of conservation of state lands, and we can find a way collectively to work toward that. So thanks, Bob. You have a little bit of background. He was nodding. That's it. So Sue, that hopefully you could hear. You got that piece. Any others? Thanks, Bob. Any other folks that we haven't heard from? Robert, you got your hand up. Go ahead, man.
Yes, as far as new ideas are concerned, the Sierra Club, we were not against Sunday hunting when there was the referendum, but we do think that that it needs to be regulated. And the idea I would like to bring up, and I don't even know if this is feasible, but I noticed on the map that there are 48 game lands east of 95 and only 14 parks. Obviously, there's a lot of places where people can go to hunt, but a lot of people who might enjoy the outdoors are not as likely to do it because there aren't very many parks there. Is it possible that the size of the game lands could be reduced, particularly close to residential areas that people are more likely to use, or there's not very many counties that have over 700,000 people. Could they be reduced in areas, and is it possible that parks could be carved out of some of these game lands so that other users would feel more comfortable going there?
So when you say parks, are you just saying that there's a zone within a game land for specific uses? I'm trying to get, because I mean, the whole parks issue is a completely different agency, budget, all of that stuff, right, Brian? I mean, so I'm trying to get at, are you saying, and I'm not trying to put words in your mouth, Robert, are we talking about carving out an area within an existing game land for a specific use? Help me out.
Well, my point of reference here, I lived in New Bern for 25 years, and there were a lot of places where you could go on the rivers and so on, but now I live in Wake County, and there's plenty of places that people can go for recreational activities. There aren't as many places where people can go east of 95. Now, this may be beyond the realm of what we're discussing here, but I would like to see more open areas that other people could use.
Okay, so this is a broader discussion about new lands, if you will, or new areas. Okay, gotcha. Thank you. I was just wanted to parse that to make sure we got it right. Thank you. Good. Okay, so we've had a broad discussion of ideas, et cetera. So let's think about, I mean, we've got a list here. Are there any of these things list-wise that, kind of jump out? How about the idea? And I'm going to put that out there. Just let's start.
Brett. Hey, Brett, can you hear me? Before we leave some of those ideas that were brought up by the group and dive into this list, which I think we're going to get back to these, but staying on a couple of those topics real quick, Lena specifically threw out an alternative or an idea in terms of, not focusing on game lands where there's a birding trail site or somehow removing that piece of the game land where there's a birding trail site. That's an alternative. That's an idea. I don't even have that list right in front of me. I don't even know what that looks like, but that's an alternative. I'm curious if Sue or Kate wouldn't mind thinking about an alternative for horseback riding, and just want to put this out there. It came up a little bit yesterday, but there are different restrictions for horseback riding at the different game lands. Some game lands, because of soil type and concerns about erosion and sedimentation, horseback riding is just flat out prohibited. As was mentioned earlier, there are sites and game lands where it's allowed throughout the year, except during hunting season is prohibited. Then there's a third option where it's allowed throughout the year, prohibited during hunting season, but allowed on Sundays. And so, we already have some different prohibitions in place there related to horseback riding. Would either of you have a thought about that in terms of proposing an alternative with those ideas already in mind? Is there anything to focus on specifically, knowing that those prohibitions already exist?
I guess the first question I would have, and then I'll turn this over to Sue, but the first question I would have is, given these three categories, are those categories open for revision to make it all one, or are those very strict in place where they are now? I mean, are we talking about revamping all of them or looking at them individually?
Well, right now, I mean, it would require to look at individually, but currently, those prohibitions are in place. And so, yes, those can be looked at, those can be reviewed, but given those are in place and you're already working within that framework, is there anything within that framework that could also meet this Sunday hunting need or discussion we're having to meet the needs of our hunting users?
Brian, thank you for the opportunity to address that. I appreciate it. I think from the Horse Council standpoint, what we would look at, I agree with Kate, it's a little confusing because there's all, it's site specific and oriented. We get calls all the time in the office about, I don't understand this one or I don't understand that one. And so overall, that's kind of another topic for us. To looking at Sunday and alternatives for us might be to take a look at those lands that we're talking, your land that we're talking about, and reassessing, kind of looking at alternatives of where their usage areas are. And I know the study addressed some of that, but it really only addressed the current lands that are available. A lot of these lands are in the eastern portion, the coastal portion, going that way. I know Voice of America was a new piece of property that we had hoped would be equestrian oriented, or a good portion of that could be equestrian oriented along with the sporting dogs and so forth. To maybe an alternative would be to look at those, to kind of consolidate the regulations, try to add hours or management styles that would increase days overall, but maybe to at least solidify Sunday on some of those lands where there weren't local parks or state property or other resources available. So that's a little vague, Brian. We could come back and kind of look at more specifics on that. Very open to that. But what I'm concerned about for our user group is that we're already so limited on which of those properties we can access. I mean, there's just a handful of them. Is there a way to identify the broader used ones? And we have 4 or 5 that are already in the study that you had, but I know there are others that have some concern, and maybe restricting those to keeping those open on Sunday. And you realize we only ride May through September pretty much on a lot of these lands based on these regulations. And those are the hottest, most least desirable time of the year to do that. So that's a big concern of our user group, that it's so restricted. We don't get to see the other natural beauty parts during this seasonal aspects.
So Sue, I got really reassess the game lands overall if there is additional opportunity.
Right.
And really think about adding days maybe to some of the game lands. The solidity, I mean, we've got so many restrictions, so we were looking for some opportunities year round. Then I heard simplifying you've got, like Brian pointed out, there's 3 rules depending on where you are, maybe simplifying that. Those were the 3 that I got, Brian.
Correct.
Yeah, I guess yes, the broader review in that other discussion, I think, is needed and can be had. I guess I'll be a little more specific in my ask, and in the current framework, Embro game land, Brinkleville game land, horseback riding is prohibited. So as we're having this discussion right now, are those locations worth considering in terms of alternatives? If we're looking at specific areas to try, and horseback riding is already prohibited at those, is that an option that you would consider?
Brian, again, I'm not sure if I understand correctly. If we have Sunday hunting, we open that up, but that we look at maybe adding some game lands that have been closed, but we could open for Sunday and maybe restrict those for Sunday hunting. Is that what you're asking?
No,
Alternative?
yeah. So sorry. I guess I'm not asking this very clearly. So in the current framework, we have some game lands that prohibit horseback riding.
Right. Right.
So there's no horseback riding going on out there at all right now. And is that a game land? I'm assuming and thought that might be a game land that you would suggest would be a good consideration for Sunday hunting. And I guess I'm just trying to see if that assumption is correct or not.
Partially so. I think where I would tend to fall away from that is that we believe that there might be some game lands out there that are currently restricted to horseback use that could offer horseback use. They just, for whatever reason, have not done that, or it may not be based on on the environmental use of the land, I guess. So if there were lands though that were absolutely, there's no way a horse, or the trail or the land property itself lent itself to horseback use, we would not oppose the Sunday hunting on that within the current framework. Does that make sense, Brian?
Yeah, that does. Yep. Thanks.
Hey, Brian. I think site-specific considerations for erosion and other heavy impact from horses or bikes, for that matter. But I think the hunting community would be willing to, support expanded horses on a lot of other game lands if, they would also be willing to support expanded Sunday hunting opportunities. I think that seems pretty reasonable middle ground.
Yeah, so that's getting at, again, where I was going is still staying in this partitioning of use idea a little bit. But what I'm hearing is maybe it's more just opening up more use for all of our users. But that horseback riding concern and conflict is something we've heard throughout this process, and I'm trying to get my head wrapped around that one a little bit more. And opening up more horseback opportunities and opening up Sunday hunting opportunities sounds like that's the win-win for everybody. I'm just not convinced that everyone actually supports that idea given the potential conflicts.
I do want to say it looks like David, who couldn't join us yesterday, David Whitmer, is from North Carolina Fish and Wildlife Conservation Council. I think, David, did you join us?
Yes, I'm on now.
Great. Okay, just double checking. I saw the number and I saw your name and I figured that was you. Just wanted to say, hey, sorry you couldn't join us yesterday. Glad you're jumping in today.
Yeah, I don't know who sent me my emails, but my stuff wasn't correct. So
yeah, it happens. Sorry about that. Glad you could be here, and we are well conversation. So Brian, are you good? I think you're good on the horseback piece. Sue taking that and helping us get that framed out. And John, I think your idea, hey, can we is there a middle ground here? That was a conversation I think that, so since you opened that dialogue, Brian, where I was going is this idea of either A, do this expanding trail buffers get at the trail building concerns and the horseback riding concerns, or B, is it more likely to go, hey, we might have some alternate use properties where, we're doing horseback riding or we're doing hunting, but not both. I'm trying to get at what are some of those other options for how to actually address what was put out there. So let's start there if you don't mind. Would buffers get at your issues?
This is Kate. I think if we come back to something that Sue brought up in terms of the hours, I would like to hear from the hunting community what they think about that. I mean, let's just throw out 11 a.m. to 4, I don't know, whatever. The hours are up for debate, but how would that address the concerns of the hunters if other users were able to come in during those times? Because those are really the times that the horseback riders at least would want to come in there anyway. So I just been curious as to the feedback, if that's even a route worth pursuing.
Good. Jacob, is that something you wanted to address? Anybody?
I just remind that there is already the state law already has a 9:30 to 12:30 carve out prohibition. So even if, you know, the WRC did open up Sunday hunting on some game lands, there is no, maybe for archery, but for gun hunting, there's still that three-hour window that's not going to change through this process. That would have to go through the legislature. So I think that's already a little bit of built in there consideration. I know it's kind of hard to get in and do a hike or do a trail ride in 3 hours and be out, but just kind of keep that in the back of your mind that there's already, you know, especially in the wintertime, that's like a third of the day already that hunters can't use that land.
Good. Jacob, you were next, and then Lena.
And back to, I think Trevor made the point originally. I think that raises some confusion really on the front of, you know, I can be in the woods, but I'm not allowed. I can be in the woods, I guess, not pursuing game or not discharging a firearm. I think that goes back to his original point of, that gets really, really confusing from the hunting community where, you know, from 6 to 9, I'm allowed to be in the woods, and I can discharge a firearm. And I understand that this bill already has a set hourly mark in there. But from that point of view, you know, saying from 6 to 9, you can be in the woods and discharge a firearm, and then from 9 to 1, you can't, and then from this time to this time, and picking those hours, I think leads to that confusion that Trevor was trying to address at the beginning, is where, you know, we want to make sure that our constituency is legally operating in the field, and I think that makes it more difficult for them to do that. If we're picking hour by hour, things like that, leads to a lot of confusion for the hunting community, and hours when they can discharge and when they can't discharge, but can be in the woods and can't be in the woods. Is a concern for us, I think.
I'm going to go to Barb just for a second, then Lena. Barb?
So I'd like to clarify. So I have spoken to a lot of our hunters who are also bird watchers, and we're talking about, when I say we would like, you know, for our Christmas counts, December 15th through January 5th, we're talking about 3 locations, Sandhills, Butner, and Jordan. I'm not talking about all game lands as far as New Hope Audubon is concerned. I'm also, you know, we as bird watchers are out there early. So we're out there at 7:30 or whenever the sun comes up. So, you know, starting at, if you didn't have hunting till 1, then that would address our concerns at least those game lands on Sundays.
Got it. So you're not talking about all game lands is what I'm hearing, Barbara. You're just really saying that there's a few places you do bird counts every year.
Correct.
In your case, you're talking about 3 specific spots.
Correct.
Okay. Got it. And that was Sandhills, what did you say, Buck Hills and Jordan?
Sandhills, Butner, Falls of the Neuse, and Jordan.
Okay.
Now, other Audubon organizations may do bird counts at other game lands, but those are the ones that we do counts at.
Okay, gotcha. Okay, thank you. Sorry, and I'm not sure why your hand raise is not coming on. I apologize. I don't see it. So it's not that I was ignoring you. Lena?
I would just like to expand a little bit on what Barbara is saying. There are Christmas bird counts all across North Carolina. And many of them are done on Sunday. I don't know how many there are, but I'm sure there are at least 40 or 50 bird counts. But the restriction that the legislature gave on firearms on Sunday, that does not mean that the commission has to I'm sorry, let me rephrase that. Does that mean that the commission is restricted from saying, we're going to allow Sunday hunting, but it's going to be at 1 o'clock or whatever?
Nina, we cannot allow hunting on Sundays between 9:30 and 12:30.
But you could also say there's no hunting from sunrise until whatever the Senate has, 12:30.
We could do that, yes.
Okay, thank you.
Got it. So that's your thinking is that you would say you can't hunt until 1 on some of those game lands, Lena, is what I'm hearing. on Sunday?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
Got it. Okay, Chris, you're up. Thanks, Lena.
I realize birding in the morning is when birds are most active. I enjoy birding myself. That's also one of the best times to hunt, is from sunrise to 9:30. Again, I think maybe this is an opportunity to engage hunters in bird watching and some of these bird counts. I think there's probably other compromises to maybe provide assurances around safety of some of the users, things like that. But I think a wholesale removal of hunting outside of 1 p.m. to sunset is especially restrictive during that time. I mean, that's sort of peak deer hunting time for a lot of folks during that December window. So that would be a tough sell, I think, for a lot of hunting constituents. But I think, again, this is a opportunity to raise awareness for how folks are using these game lands at these times, and perhaps to find some sort of cooperative ways to address the issue versus just outright bans.
Well, Chris, thoughts on that topic? So what are some options that maybe kind of jump out? I mean, we've talked about that idea of maybe just going, hey, here's some riding places, here's a few birding places, we got hunting places. I mean, that's one option that we talked about, was just sort of more specific places, and then that I've just thrown that out. Do you have any ideas on it now, or are you just sort of just in the brainstorm mode?
Yeah, I mean, I'm willing to spitball a little bit here. But yeah, I think birding clubs and meeting with perhaps certain hunting interest groups, if there's sportsmen's groups in the area, things like that. I mean, I think we could talk to each other and sort of navigate a lot of these issues versus use strict mandates as designed with the wildlife, as proposed currently. Again, I realize this is sort of key. These are key times for these various groups to be in the woods in December. So I think recognizing that and providing opportunities and navigating, potential conflicts through conversations could perhaps address a lot of these issues and kind of gain appreciation for all the folks involved of these other interests. Perhaps I'm too much of an optimist here, but that's sort of that's I think an opportunity again that I'd like to propose. And I don't know how you facilitate those conversations specifically, if the commission is the one playing that lead, or how exactly that is navigated. But I think a lot of the folks at the table today are perhaps the ones that would be involved in sort of negotiating that space.
Good, Robert. Go ahead. I'm sorry.
Yeah.
Did I cut you off, Chris? I apologize.
No, you're good. That's all I got.
All right, Robert, you're up, and then Lena. And then
Okay. I think the 9:30 to 12:30 restriction is actually a good time. And to me, it would make more sense to have a restriction on the locations when it's close to residential neighborhoods, or when it's close to a really large population center where a lot of people are not going to be familiar with the orange rule. If you have a residential neighborhood that's right next door to a game land, you really can't expect the children in that neighborhood to necessarily understand the rules about wearing orange. And, kids aren't going to stay on trails, and they could be mistaken for game. So that is my concern. I think we should focus on location rather than time.
So we're looking for criteria, Robert, and I would throw it out there. So from your perspective, one criteria for consideration might be where you have a highly urban game land, that we might consider that being one we have to look at more closely around Sunday hunting versus more rural areas, is what I'm hearing.
Yes, I think that's what needs to be done, and I can think of a couple of places offhand, where I've been, where the game lands are very close to residential neighborhoods, and I'm sure there's others all around the state. But the 9:30 to 12:30 sounds like a reasonable time for a restriction to me, except maybe the birders won't be as comfortable.
Got it.
You know,
Thank
because
you.
they like to come in early.
Yeah. Lena, and then Kate, and then Barb. You're muted, Lena.
Sorry. Yeah. I think Chris is right that there is discussion that we can have, and I'd like to make 3 points. That we tend to say the hunters want Sunday hunting, but there are also hunters that want to have a day when they can take their families to a game land and do some photography and enjoy it free of these security issues. The other thing is that we all want the same thing for those lands. We want them to be sound environmental properties that help North Carolina and our country in terms of having good habitat for wildlife and that it's managed properly. One thing that I would like to see discussed is maybe in exchange for some of the Sunday hunting days, especially for the Christmas bird count season, would be maybe to expand a couple of days for hunting for a couple of weeks in advance and a couple of weeks after those requested times for for Christmas bird counts. And the third is that I keep hearing that all the game land, the bulk of the game land support comes from hunters, and that's true. Other than the huge amount that comes from the federal government, Fish and Wildlife. But anyway, regardless.
That's hunters too, though. That's $100.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But regardless of that, I would just like to say that I'm speaking for myself personally. I have spoken to a number of friends who are in agreement with me, but I am sharing my personal opinion. And that is that I think most users of game lands would be willing to have some kind of fee or user's fee. And I'm going to give an example of maybe a duck stamp. So it could be a game land stamp that could be purchased, not at the same rate as a hunter would purchase, but it would include more people because there are many, many more people who are using those game lands than there are hunters using the game lands. So I would like to see that explored to have a user's, I wouldn't call it a user's fee because that creates too many barriers. It would be an opportunity fee to support and expand the game land and go from there. So I see there was a question that came up, why not the same amount as the hunters? Because then you would eliminate most people from going out to game lands. And then it would be an even bigger issue.
Right. So that, I think that's $15, Lena, 15 to 25, depending on the thing. So is that, you think that would eliminate people from going to game lands?
Is that what I don't know what the
That's it.
Hunting license is 15 to 25?
25 is the cheapest hunting license.
Right.
So I think a little bit less than that because you have an opportunity to reach many, many more people. There are, if you look at the numbers from the last 2016 Fish and Wildlife's user, wildlife and hunting, fishing, and wildlife watching, there are far more people that are using land for wildlife watching than there are hunters. So you would make up the difference in the price and gain more support. If it's too high and people think it's the same as a hunting license, I think you would really shoot yourself in the foot in terms of making it work in North Carolina. And then the problem would be even bigger. So start low and you know, talk it up and get the groups involved and make it a positive thing that we're trying to keep these habitats usable for everybody.
Right. And Nina, one thought about that is if everyone were to buy a hunting license, you know, all of those funds that are generated from that purchase would go back into the habitat that benefits hunters and birders. It goes in the parking lots that benefits hunters and birders. It goes in the roads that benefits hunters and birders. And so, you know, these users are using the same resource. And I think, you know, suggesting one might have a lower impact than the other, I'm not so sure about. I'm wondering if those users who are wanting to have a fee to pay, if they would be willing to pay that same amount as hunters.
I can't answer that, but I will tell you that I can go on a game land and I can bird watch or wildlife watch or photography, go for a hike, go rock climbing, and all those other things. If I am going to go hunting and I take home my deer or my turkey or any of those other things, I am supplementing my food. So I'm reducing my grocery bill because I'm taking something home. That does not happen with non-consumptive users.
Can I say something really quick? This notion that there are consumptive users and non-consumptive users, I think, is a misnotion. Everyone is a consumptive user, whether or not you are taking an animal off that property or you are interacting. If you step off of a trail, you're a consumptive user. Just because you take home a deer versus go take a photo of that deer, you're still having an impact on the ground. You're still having an impact on the environment. And so I would say make the hunting license and the access fee the same amount, $25 for everybody. And if that's a barrier to entry, then we need to have another discussion down the road about license fee structures, which I'm sure Brian and all them would love to have. Sorry, Brian, but this notion that just because you're taking a photo versus maybe harvesting a duck, that you should pay less, I think gets us in the same position that we're in right now, where 10 years from now or even a year from now, hunters come back to the table and say, why are we paying more when they're having just as much impact? They're using the same parking lots. They're having the same impact on the environment that we are. I think it sets up more problems than it actually alleviates.
I am not saying that we are not consumptive in terms of using the land. I am talking about what it means to my refrigerator and my family in terms of reducing my food cost. Okay.
Yeah, but there are a lot of hunters out there that don't reduce their food costs.
I hear you. And I don't like the use of consumptive and non-consumptive either, but that is going to come up in any discussion in adding some kind of user fee. So.
Got it. Thanks, Lena. There are a lot of folks waiting. So on this topic right here that we've just had, I've seen Cyrus had a bunch of stuff that was coming through and others. Are there anybody else want to just wrap on this conference discussion about fees, et cetera, before we jump to another topic? So I want to give those folks a chance first.
I would.
Yeah, please.
I guess it's my turn.
Right.
I think the user fees are a good idea. Expanding the users fees, you might change the name of it from a hunter's license to a game land user's license or something like that. However, people who live nearby to the game lands, once again, they're not necessarily going to know about these rules, and I think this is something that needs to be taken into consideration as well. Kids going into the woods and so on.
Gotcha. Okay. Thanks. You're up, Barbara, you're up, and then I had Chris. If you're trying to stay on this topic, if we can, if we need to change, by all means. But let me start there.
So I would say I've discussed this with a number of the people in New Hope Audubon, and they are all willing to pay a fee and think it would be more than appropriate. And I don't think any of them would have a problem with paying $25 for an annual access to game lands. So I don't find that insurmountable, and I'm just speaking for bird watchers. Also, I just want to note that a lot of our bird watchers are also hunters, and a lot of those people are also the ones leading the hikes on these game lands. And they appreciate that when they go out there early in the morning that there's not hunting, especially during the counts. And that's the reason why all our counts are on Sundays right now, is because those are the non-hunting days currently. So I just want to stress that point. Thank you.
Got it. Okay. Chris,
Yeah. So, yeah, thanks. A couple of things. Lena, I think you identified a really important issue as far as the number of users that are non-hunters versus numbers that are hunters. In general, in the hunting community, there's some pretty broad concerns around long-term loss of active hunters. And given our current structure of how we fund conservation on game lands, this is a huge issue. As hunting numbers continue to decline, the core group of hunters right now are sort of aging out of being able to hunt. So I think that this is a very broad concern for me, and I think a lot of the folks on the call today, as far as just an existential sort of question about what is the future of hunting and how we fund conservation on game lands look like. But I think a cross-cutting issue or solution to this would be a wholesale adoption of hunting licenses being needed to use game lands. I think one, you would then receive the regulation digest and you'd be part of the system. So you would be aware of all the regulations in place. You'd be aware of what when the hunting seasons land, just all the things. You'd become more informed about this issue if you're then sort of under that umbrella. Two, I think it potentially opens folks up that are learning more about hunting to potentially become new hunters. I think that there's a lot of folks that may be interested, but there's barriers to entry. And I think this could be an excellent way to get new people engaged in hunting that have not currently hunted. So again, I see this as an opportunity. I see this as an opportunity. So I think that this license fee would then sort of, one, make it equitable, because I think this is a can of worms if you start sort of having uneven fee structures. And it's a really tough, it's a tough conversation to have. And again, I mean, it's a slippery slope, I think. So having a flat way to address this, I think, is probably the best solution as far as that goes. It just simplifies the conversation. But two, I think all those issues that I just identified, I think it's pretty cross-cutting and could really, again, I mean, I'm trying to sell some an optimistic outlook on how we can address this, but I see this as a really good path forward if we can adopt a model like this.
Yeah, Chris, good points. And there was a question in the text for you, Lena. So if you want to look at that from Chris Bova, if you don't mind giving him an answer. But I think birders are in the same existential threat as well, Chris, which is pretty interesting. You know, those traditional groups, all of them are kind of aging up. The new groups, the people that are going to have to maintain game lands for the future, they are doing very different things than traditional, whether it's hunt, fish, or bird. So getting them involved is important as well. Good points. Kate, you there? You had your hand up for a while.
Yeah, I wanted to cover off on a couple things. One is that there is currently, when our trail opens at Mason Point, there will require a recreation license. I don't remember the exact name of it, which is only $15, but I completely support the idea of equal fees. So, but there is something out there that has a certain name that could be could be the same amount charged as the hunting license.
Yeah, just real quick, our game land license, and that's $15, and that's required at Jordan Caswell for horseback riders, and where we have infrastructure there for those users. But that's the current name, and that's the current cost.
Yeah, so that good points, and we'd had just broadly, I can recall back in our discussions and we hit on it. I think Chris brought it up, which was great. So if you looked at the quote hunting license as a vehicle, there are other vehicles that come forward. The one plus is that with the quote hunting license, that you end up with, there is a potential for federal match. So you get that 3-for-1 basic match from the federal government coming out of the trust fund. So when you see that $7.5 million a year in maintenance fees that are coming from the match from hunters, and then, you know, that federal match, it's a big chunk. So that was one conversation that did come up, Chris, in our conversations. I did hear a lot of groups say that there was if you had a checkoff to say, yeah, that's great, but being part of that vision of making sure, you know, it's trails for everyone, it's habitat for everyone, it's those kind of things. Could we have a checkoff on there, Chris, that said, you know, I'm a kayaker, I'm a birder, I'm a whatever. So it's not just hunter on the piece. So there's been a lot of discussion about that. We will cover that in a lot of detail this afternoon, but wanted to make sure we had any other comments there before we moved on.
Yeah, Brett, I think Kate had one more. I think I cut her off a little bit there.
Sorry, Kate, my bad.
No, I cut her off.
No, it was timely. It was good that you provided the answer to that before I went on. I just wanted to clarify a couple things. I'm probably the only person in the groups that has a focus just on one, at least for now, just on one specific game land. And so in the context of that, what would happen is if we lose Sundays, or even part of Sundays, we've been granted the opportunity to put in this horse trail where there are not a lot of other horse trails around in this area, and an 11-mile loop. And unless everybody gets out there exactly 9:30, but not even then, they're not going to be able to cover the 11-mile loop in that morning time frame. So I'm not saying it can't be that Sunday hunting can't be opened there. It would, you know, if we could open other days, but I understand that's not what's on the table. So what I was also hearing from the birders, and I think sounds like a possibility, is this location by location. And I'm not talking all these adjacent, you know, like just pick them pieces, but it does sound like it's a location-based idea that could move forward rather than a time-based or those other kind of things that we were talking about.
Got it. Thanks, Kate. Any, just kind of going from there, there's been by the way, the text is going great. Thanks everybody for kind of getting your comments and questions in. It gives us an extra way. So to look at things. Let's go to then that idea of what are the overall just basic thoughts on two ideas that seem to be popping up. One is this idea of location-based potential decision-making and/or buffers within locations to say, you know, kind of distributed use within a property like Jordan, for example, as you brought up, Kate. Any thoughts on those that just in general from the group? Go ahead, John.
Yeah, I just want to back up real quick. Kind of the stuff too, I think about the kids and all that. What can the hunting community do to proactively educate and be helpful to a hiker or a birder or a horse person, you know, whether it's better signage or proactive education? Like, I would welcome some feedback on things we could do to try to help alleviate some of those concerns, you know, so that people are educated. And I understand people from Florida go to Pisgah and they don't know it's hunting season, and, you know, I get that kind of stuff. So if there are any suggestions for that, you know, I think we'd be willing to be proactive and to do a better job. Like in Virginia on the signage here, they put up each hunting season all the kiosks and they update that annually. I think that's really helpful. So, and then just real quick to the concerns about the bird counts. Lena, or you, or is anybody else, have you consulted with, you know, birders in other states where Sunday hunting that takes place, in like Tennessee and Georgia and, you know, a lot of other places? Like, how, I mean, is Sunday hunting, or do they, I mean, it seems like they can get their bird counts done in, you know, 40 states. Is it, you know, what lessons can you learn from them to be able to implement that in North Carolina?
John, I have not done anything like that. I would not be the person to do it, and I'm not quite sure how we would do that. Bird counts are scheduled independently of each other. There's no organization other than the group that collects them, which is through Audubon and National Audubon and Cornell Lab of Ornithology. They're independent 15-mile radius circles. So I don't know. I'm not quite sure how you would ever get to that, but no, I've not checked outside of North Carolina.
Yeah, how are other states doing? That's a great question, John.
And there, the other point of that is North Carolina has a lot more populated areas than some of these other states. I mean, if you look between Charlotte and Raleigh, and we have a lot of highly populated areas that impact or that are adjacent to game lands. So some of these groups are going away from their communities to do counts outside of the area. So it is, you know, I don't know how you would get a handle on that. But
I get that, but there might be some lessons to look at, like outside of Atlanta or Nashville or California or Seattle. Those are really high populated areas, and they get their bird counts done too. So there might be some, you know, we could do some outreach to, you know, learn some lessons from those states.
Okay.
Thanks, Lynn. Thanks, John. Trevor, you've been patient.
Absolutely. Thank you, Brett. And this is a question either for Brian or someone else from the WRC. Are there currently buffer zones on game lands as far as trails go? And if so, or if not, how would those be marked for hunters? And how do you keep, you know, someone within those boundaries, whether they're a hunter going in the buffer zone or someone working within that trail going outside of the buffer zone into, say, a hunting area?
Yeah, Trevor, good question. No, essentially we don't have buffers along trails. And your other questions, I would just have to say those are really good questions. How would we mark them? How would they be, you know, what would those boundaries look like? How would that be enforced? I don't have answers to that at this point.
Trevor, we did discuss that quite a bit yesterday too, and just that, and is it even enforceable just given, you know, just people are out and all of a sudden they're on a trail, you know, they're wandering in the woods. But so we had a lot of discussion about buffers yesterday. I think those are excellent questions. So Sue, you were up next, sorry.
Okay, sorry about that. I wanted to go back to John's question on what could we do. I think, John, that's a really good point. I think there's a lot of education that needs to go on. Yes, horses are prey animals, but we also do mounted shooting. We also, you know, have historically been ridden in wars. The horse can be adjusted to the fact of a firearm. So there is a lot of education and I think opportunities that in conjunction maybe with Wildlife and the Horse Council to begin that education process to look at a better sharing of the land. The issue there then becomes sharing of how do we do that to where everybody feels like, you know, they haven't lost something or they've gained something in that process. So I wanted to address that.
Fabulous. Thanks, Sue. Appreciate that.
Yeah, hey, Brett, one more thing. I think we're going to have lots of discussions today, so I do just want to circle back one more time on a topic that we touched on earlier, and it was the prohibition of hours discussion. So we've got the 9:30 to 12:30 prohibition in already on Sundays. You know, John, Trevor, Chris, you touched on this once already, but Cyrus, you know, we didn't hear much from y'all. You know, right now we've got the 9:30 to 12:30 prohibition. If that were extended to 2 o'clock, 3 o'clock, you know, again, I'm not sure, Sue, Lena, if that would meet your needs, but I'm just looking at this extension of this prohibition. If it were to go from 9:30 till 2 o'clock, you know, Chris, you mentioned that would increase complexity. Just curious if you guys have any further thoughts on that from the hunting perspective.
Yeah, John, go ahead real quick and then I'll follow up.
Yeah, thanks, Brian. I was gonna say we kind of talked about that. It's a way to kind of get some traction. I think that'd be, you know, positive to get some Sunday hunting open. But I just, you know, I guess the biggest group of hunters are deer hunters. So they're probably hunting in the morning and the evening. But there are folks that bird hunt, and like I bird hunt, and so, you know, that's middle of the day, or rabbit hunters, they're out there. So, you know, I think then you kind of start creating conflicts between hunting groups, and that would be my concern, but I'm not, that's just something to think about.
Yeah.
John, your thought there would be that, let's just say, and it gets at a little bit of some of the points that were made of having a few more hours from the user's perspective, particularly horseback riding we heard, but that idea of, let's just say if you went, instead of 12:30, you added an hour and a half, you would think that would be not feasible, confusing.
No, I'm just saying then you're going to have bird hunters saying, well, why do, that those hours are catered for deer hunters and not catered for me. I'm a rabbit hunter. I hunt, at whatever time. So that's kind of what you're getting into. And is it that hunters would not be able to hunt during those hours, or conversely that non-hunters would not be able to use those would non-hunters not be able to access the lands out, in other hours, because
just for the brainstorming purposes, I was just asking about extending that current prohibition till like 2 o'clock. That's
right. Yeah,
that was kind of the question I had.
Yeah, that going back to Lena's concern. I mean, birders, they're out there early in the morning too, so I just want to be respectful of everybody's concerns on
in my
prime time
personal,
to be in the woods.
Go ahead.
My personal opinion, I think the only way that you could do that is if you bifurcate it right down the middle. I mean, we have existing constructs with the 9:30 to 12 already written in legislation or written in the law, but the only way that I think you could part out and not have still some infighting between user groups is if you have, okay, it's open for hunting from dawn until 12, and then open for, and then no hunting from 12 until dark. And then you've got, it's a little bit more defined versus, okay, you can hunt from sunup to 9:30 or 9:29, and then you got to get out of there, but then you can come back at 12:30, but everyone can be there. If you're a birder, you can be there the entire day. It just gets a little confusing.
Yeah. So that 9:30, 12:30, that's in there. That's happening. We have no control over that.
Yeah.
We can't get rid of that one. So it's either just live with it as it is or expanding it. And that expansion idea is just something I wanted to dive into a little bit more, but I understand how that does add some confusion and some complexity.
Yeah, this is Torrin Miller with the National Deer Alliance. I just agree with what Cyrus said there. We see that kind of thing in some of our seasons already. For instance, in Pennsylvania, parts of the turkey season are open from sunup till 12 noon, and then you cannot hunt the rest of the day. So that's something that I think hunters are used to in some respects already. And rather than, blocking off a section midday that's off limits, it makes sense to say, you can't hunt until after 12:30 on Sundays or something like that. I think logistically it's just easier that way.
I'll just chime in real quick. Those 12 o'clock turkey hunting regs in the Northeast states, those are outdated and not based on science.
I wouldn't use that as your justification.
I'm going to disagree with you there, respectfully, Torrin.
Okay.
I'll chime in. I agree with a lot of the folks that spoke before me. I see. I mean, if that's a compromise position that could move us forward, I think I've had some folks in our membership sort of raise that solution internally. I think it'd have to get discussed and thought over for a little bit, but I see that as a potential compromise solution. It is a little messy, but compared to not expanding Sunday hunting onto game lands and perhaps having more flexibility on more game lands than not, then I see that as potentially a good compromise.
Yeah, and it could be part of, and I'm not crafting solutions, but one alternative clearly that works is that it may very well be that without making it too complex, we could come up with some criteria that make it actually work. We've heard a little bit about those large urban areas, Jordan specifically, and maybe we're looking at some very different approaches for maybe urban versus very rural. I think we can start to look at some of these options and just see, keeping it as simple as possible, but any change other than absolute yes or no, obviously adds complexity. Brian brought that point up earlier. You know, if we're going to find good solutions that can help everybody, then there'll be some complexity, but can we make them as clean and easy to understand as possible? Because it's going to be a huge educational discussion to have anyway. And by the way, if we do anything with hunting on Sunday, it's going to be an educational piece anyway, right? I mean, you know, folks have just gotten used to not having that. So just floor open. We have about 9 or 10 minutes that I want to give everybody a chance to kind of summarize their thinking going into, we got a 2-hour lunch break, and we'll come back and pick it up there. So anyone who hasn't had a chance to get an idea on the floor yet or wants to summarize some thinking for folks to think about as we go through our break, and then we can wrap it right there at 11. So I wanted to put that out there.
I'll jump in if nobody's talking. Instead of maybe doing the hours or the zones and all that, I think that maybe a trial run of just, I don't know, 30 or 25, 12 or 6 or whatever that number is, just find some game lands where there might be, I know it's hard in every part of the region there's going to be people to use them, but some game lands where we might just, that have lower user conflict, and we could just try Sunday hunting on those all day long and see how that works. You know, if there's some, you know, Jordan, you know, may not work because it's got a lot of people, things around Durham, maybe have a ton of hikers and kids or whatever. So, you know, if there's some ones that, you know, like, you know, thinking like Cold Mountain Game Land or Silver, you know, like those are, you know, not many people use them in general. So maybe just put that on the table to see if anybody would be willing just to try to pick a dozen or something like that and start from there.
So the starting point would be kind of we have some data and we put that, I think we shared that, but just a starting point to say, find those lands that are not as heavily utilized by other user groups, make those hunting on Sundays and really get that start to see how does that work out. And we can do our lessons learned from that, John. So as a proposal, thoughts on that? Trevor, you had your hand up.
This is Trevor from NSSF. I would concur with what John has said. Selecting X number of game lands to open up for, you know, all hunting, all species. Obviously, with that 9:30 to 12:30 exemption, that's something NSSF would support. And again, it'd be a trial run to see what it looks like with hunters and non-hunting recreational users. And I think that would give the commission, you know, some information to move forward with the potential for opening other game lands. So yes, NSSF would support that. Thank you.
Hey, Brett, I've got a question.
Sure.
For falconers, Bob, are there any certain game lands that falconers use more heavily, or are there any activities that are going on that really interrupt falconry?
The reality of it is that most falconers, if they know that people are going to be gun hunting on the property, won't take their birds there. We have a lot of different things that we consider: barbed wire, telephone lines, all those things are hazardous to our birds. So we just kind of look at a list and avoid it. We've had access on Sunday. We think, you know, realistically, that's kind of was a wonderful thing, but we can see that there is a need to open up game lands. I would agree with what has just been said about opening up the game lands that are in more rural areas, because the generality is that people that are using game lands for falconry are generally going on lands that are close to populated areas, because that's where it's hard to find places to go hunting.
Gotcha.
But, the bird watchers, the horseback riders, the bikers, that's not a conflict for us at all, if that's what we're asking.
Thanks. Barb, you've had it.
Yeah, I think that's something that we could agree with. I mean, Jordan and Butner, both of those areas that we visit a lot, but there are a lot of other users on those days too. So I think that if we looked at places that were not near urban areas, or going to be in areas that are so highly developed as starting points, that is something that we would agree with.
Okay. Thanks. And Sue?
I would concur with that. I think I would like us, though, to consider in looking at the select lands, that we look at land areas that don't have as much public land available. So you're looking more at the eastern kind of section. Also looking at lands that, these lands that we know are not going to ever be able environmentally to allow equestrian use, and making sure some of those issues are put in place, not just those that don't allow it now, but looking a little deeper into the data of what we have, and then starting with those select. We would have no opposition to that.
So if I were crafting this kind of going into our break period, what I'm hearing is that a smart look at utilization of existing lands. Definitely there was that urban interface piece that we did want to talk about, but a smart look at lands. You know, we've got birdlands, we've got different things, but finding whatever, there's no magic number, 30, whatever it is, just finding a number that would work. Look at the finer details and the granularity of user things, and that would be a solid, smart start as to, you know, opening up and seeing what that looks like, and find those areas that offer the least conflict. Would certainly be one alternative that I'm hearing from the group. There were some, you know, there's some considerations in that we'd have to look at, but essentially there's probably some easy wins here if we look and we find those properties that are available to us that would be, you know, sort of, hey, they're generally hunting anyway, and there's not a lot of other utilizations on those Sundays. And then where there are, fine, we will learn a whole lot from those. If there are any user issues that go on there, there's a learning phase here. So did I kind of summarize that okay? Anything to add to that summary?
I think that pretty well would summarize it for us. That one thing we would be careful on is the smart look at land, not just on the data that you currently have, because it's driven by what's just currently open.
Agreed. And that's clear that there's more data that would be needed. Right. I'm convinced that we don't have the detail of data that we would need to make really, you know, let the data make the choice for us. But I think with smart people like the folks in this meeting, we could find those and really think through those issues if we kept everybody involved and went out there. We're not going to get it perfect, but I think we can get close. So I'm going to suggest that we will leave the session open. We will be back at 1 p.m. And so this is here. If you log out, you can certainly log right back in. Everything's the same. And that's what we've got. We'll see everyone at 1. I hope you can join us. And if you're a little later, a little early, doesn't matter. You can jump right in that conversation. So, and I'm here and we'll kind of be monitoring. So if there's questions or thoughts or comments or whatever, we're here to kind of continue on. But I wanted to give everybody a timeout and mental and physical health break. Go get some lunch, and we'll see everyone at 1 o'clock. Thank you. Good morning, by the way. Great discussions.
Yeah, thanks, everybody. Good discussions. We'll see you at 1.
Thanks, Ryan. Vern, you can peg that recording there. Gotcha. Good. Recording me eat a sandwich.